I used to believe in love. Real, unconditional love, the kind they write about in novels or show in old movies. When I married Lily's, I thought I had found that. She was beautiful, charming, and had this effortless way of making everyone around her feel special. I still remember the night we sat on my apartment floor eating takeout, laughing over nothing and thinking, this is the woman I want to spend my life with. Our wedding was a grand affair, a perfect celebration of what I believed was the beginning of a lifelong journey together. The honeymoon in the Maldives was supposed to be the icing on the cake, a time for us to bask in our happiness. But as the days passed, something felt off. At first, I brushed it off as my own overthinking. Love could be overwhelming, and maybe I just needed to adjust to this new reality. But Lily seemed detached. Not in the obvious way that would raise immediate red flags, but in the subtle, almost imperceptible way that gnaws at you in quiet moments. She was always on her phone, barely engaging in deep conversations. Whenever I tried to plan outings for just the two of us, she was more interested in the luxury of the resorts, the shopping, the expensive experiences. One evening, as we dined at a private beachside restaurant, I tried to reconnect with her. "This place is incredible, isn't it?" I said, hoping to spark a genuine moment between us. She barely looked up from her phone, nodding absently. "Yeah, it's nice." Nice. That was it. Not breathtaking, not amazing, just nice. She was more interested in taking photos for social media than actually being present with me. I told myself I was imagining things, that I just needed to give it time. But deep down, a small voice was already whispering that something was wrong. That night, she fell asleep early, her phone clutched in her hand. I couldn't sleep, so I stepped out onto the balcony, letting the ocean breeze cool my restless thoughts. Something wasn't right, but I wasn't ready to accept it yet. A few days later, the uneasy feeling hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown stronger. Lily's had become increasingly preoccupied with things that had nothing to do with our marriage. It was always about the next expensive purchase, the next spa treatment, the next Instagram-worthy moment. I tried to tell myself that she was just enjoying the honeymoon, that I was being unfair for expecting her to spend every second doting on me. But it wasn't just that. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was late at night, and I had woken up thirsty. As I got up to grab a bottle of water, I heard Lily's whispering on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but something in her voice made me pause. "No, it's done," she said quietly, her voice laced with certainty. "Just a little longer, and I'll have everything." I froze. Everything? What did she mean by that? My stomach twisted as I listened, my mind racing with possibilities. Was she talking about something innocent? Maybe she was discussing a surprise for me? But deep down, I knew better. The tone of her voice was not one of excitement or affection. It was calculated. Cold. I crept back into bed, careful not to let her know I had overheard anything. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anger and disbelief threatening to overwhelm me. I needed to know the truth. I needed proof. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. If she had noticed me awake in the night, she didn't mention it. Instead, she was cheerful, talking about a jewelry store she wanted to visit before we left the island. I played along, nodding at the right moments, smiling when expected. Inside, I was unraveling. By the time we returned home, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. If I had learned anything from that night, it was that Lily's was careful, calculating. If she had married me with ulterior motives, she wouldn't be sloppy about it. I had to be smarter. I had to be patient. I started paying attention to everything. The way she acted when she thought I wasn't looking, the people she spoke to, the way her spending habits escalated overnight. But the real confirmation came when I stumbled upon a message from her sister, Margaret. "You've secured the bag, sis. Just play along a little longer." My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the words on her phone screen. I had been right. This wasn't love. It was a setup. And I wasn't about to let her win. I wasn't the type to act on impulse, and I knew that reacting emotionally wouldn't get me anywhere. In the past, I had always believed in confronting issues head-on, trusting that honesty and directness could fix most problems. But this wasn't a misunderstanding or a simple argument. This was calculated deception. And if I wanted to come out of this unscathed, I had to be just as calculating. Lily's had played her part well, crafting an image of love and devotion, fooling not just me, but everyone around us. If I wanted to come out of this unscathed, I had to be methodical. Confronting her wouldn't be enough. I needed to turn the tables on her, to make her feel the very deception she had woven around me. For days, I wrestled with my emotions, pretending everything was fine while my mind worked tirelessly to piece together the truth. I paid attention to every detail, every inconsistency in her words and actions. The way she never mentioned our future, only her immediate desires. The way she made purchases without a second thought, as if she wasn't worried about money running out. And the way she had subtly distanced herself from me, as if she were biding her time. Margaret was the first person I reached out to. Not just because of the message I had seen, but because something about her had always felt different from Lily's. She had never seemed as obsessed with status or wealth, never carried the same air of entitlement. If anyone in Lily's circle could be reasoned with, it was her. If Lily's had confided in her, there was a chance she knew more than just what that single message revealed. But I needed to be careful. Margaret wasn't just Lily's sister. She was part of her world, raised alongside her, accustomed to her ways. I wasn't sure if she would be loyal to me or to her sister, but I had to take the risk. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately. "Meet me at the cafe on 5th Avenue tomorrow at noon." The next day, I arrived early. The cafe was quiet, the hum of distant conversations blending with the soft clinking of porcelain cups. I spotted Margaret near the window, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, her expression unreadable. As I approached, she barely looked up. "I know why you asked me here," she finally said, her voice steady but laced with something that almost sounded like regret. "And I know what you saw." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "Lily's always knew how to get what she wanted," Margaret continued, stirring her coffee absently. "She's done this before. Not marriage, but using people. She's always had a plan." Her words confirmed everything I had suspected, but hearing them out loud made it all the more real. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, studying her face. Margaret let out a long sigh. "Because I warned her. I told her not to do this to you. I told her she was making a mistake. But she never listens." That was all I needed to hear. Margaret wasn't my enemy. She was an unwilling bystander in her sister's schemes. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't going to stand in my way. Over the next few weeks, I laid the groundwork for my plan. I transferred assets, secured accounts, and ensured that every luxury Lily's had access to was under my name alone. If she thought she was about to gain financial freedom at my expense, she was in for a rude awakening. Lily's continued playing the perfect wife, unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. I kept up my role as well, pretending to be none the wiser. Every request she made, a new car, a designer bag, a luxury vacation, was met with enthusiasm. I let her believe she was winning. I watched her closely, noting the moments when she dropped her guard, the fleeting looks of satisfaction when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She was comfortable now, assured of her success. And that was exactly what I wanted. Margaret and I continued to talk, though we kept our conversations discreet. Over time, something shifted between us, a quiet understanding, a mutual respect born from the shared knowledge of what Lily's had done. Margaret wasn't just helping me out of guilt anymore. She seemed genuinely invested in what I was doing. And the more we talked, the more I realized how different she was from her sister. Lily's thrived on control, on manipulation, on taking. Margaret, on the other hand, was thoughtful, reserved. She didn't seek attention or wealth. She had built her own life, separate from Lily's schemes, and I found myself drawn to that. But I wasn't ready to think about that yet. My focus was on the plan. The moment came sooner than I expected. Lily's had been pushing harder lately, asking about our financial accounts, pressing me for details on investments. She was getting impatient. And impatience made people sloppy. That evening, as she sat across from me in our living room, scrolling through her phone, I leaned back in my chair and said, "I was thinking about what you said. About investing more aggressively." She perked up instantly, setting her phone down. "Really? What kind of investments?" "Real estate," I said smoothly. "A few properties overseas. It's a long-term play, but the returns are solid." Her eyes lit up, and I knew I had her. I played my role perfectly, painting a picture of financial opportunity, feeding her the dream of wealth beyond what she had originally planned for. And she fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. She had no idea what was coming. I had always imagined betrayal as something loud, a dramatic confrontation, an explosion of emotions. But the real thing? It was quiet, subtle, a slow unraveling, thread by thread, until the whole fabric of trust came apart. And as I watched Lily's bask in the illusion of control, I knew she had no idea that her perfect scheme was already falling apart. For weeks, I continued playing the devoted husband, feeding her false reassurances while ensuring that every financial safeguard was in place. The overseas investments I had mentioned? They existed, just not in the way she thought. I had transferred all major assets to a separate holding, one she had no access to. Our shared accounts were nothing more than empty shells, designed to look impressive on paper but containing little of actual value. And the moment she tried to make a move, the truth would hit her like a brick wall. Lily's, however, remained blissfully unaware. If anything, she had grown more confident, more assured in her victory. She talked about future plans, the places we would travel, the people she wanted to impress. She even began hinting about properties she had her eye on, as if the money was already hers. "We should look at that estate in the hills," she mused one afternoon, flipping through a real estate magazine. "It's exclusive, but with your business growing, it would be a smart investment." I smiled, nodding. "Of course. We should set up a meeting." She beamed, unaware that I had already locked down my company's shares under legal protections that prevented her from ever laying claim to them. Margaret and I met in secret from time to time, discussing the details of what was to come. At first, I thought she was only helping out of guilt, trying to make up for what her sister had done. But as we talked more, I saw something else: resentment. Margaret had spent her life cleaning up Lily's messes, watching her manipulate people without consequences. This wasn't just about me. This was Margaret finally stepping out of her sister's shadow, finally choosing not to let Lily's win again. Unlike Lily's, she had grown uneasy as things escalated. "She really thinks she's going to walk away with everything," Margaret said one evening, shaking her head. "I almost feel bad for her." "Almost?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She sighed. "I know she's my sister, but she did this to herself. She had choices. She always does." That was the thing about Lily's. Choices had always been in front of her, and she had always chosen the same path: self-interest. This time, she had simply picked the wrong person to betray. The moment came sooner than I expected. I had thought Lily's would wait longer, would tread more carefully. But impatience was her weakness, and she had finally reached the point where she was ready to make her move. It started with small tests, withdrawals from accounts she assumed were still full, purchases made on credit cards that were no longer connected to my primary finances. At first, she dismissed the failed transactions as banking errors, but as they piled up, I could see the frustration growing. Then came the real mistake. One evening, I arrived home to find Lily sitting stiffly on the couch, her phone in her lap, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Of course," I replied, setting my keys down and taking a seat across from her. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, as if debating how to approach the conversation. Then she exhaled sharply. "I noticed something strange with our accounts. Some funds seem to be missing." I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "Missing? That's odd. Are you sure it's not a temporary hold? Banks do that sometimes with large transactions." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Casper, I know what I'm talking about. I've checked multiple times. Money that should be there isn't." She was testing me, trying to gauge my reaction. But I had spent too long preparing for this moment to falter now. "That's concerning," I said, leaning forward. "Let's look into it together. I'll call the bank first thing in the morning." For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across her face. Her lips parted slightly, as if forming a question she wasn't ready to ask. Her fingers tensed around her phone, knuckles paling as she gripped it tighter. A small crease formed between her brows, her usually composed expression giving way to something raw, uncertainty. She blinked once, then twice, recalculating, searching for an explanation that made sense. But I could see it in her eyes. She was starting to realize she was no longer in control. She had expected me to panic, to scramble. Instead, I was calm. Too calm. And that meant only one thing: I wasn't caught off guard. She didn't sleep well that night. I could hear her shifting restlessly beside me, her mind racing. I knew she would try again in the morning, hoping that whatever was blocking her access had been temporary. But she would find the same thing. Nothing. When she woke up, I was already dressed, sipping my coffee at the kitchen table. She barely greeted me as she grabbed her phone and disappeared into the other room. 5 minutes later, I heard the sound of something being slammed down. She stormed back into the kitchen, her face pale. "Casper," she said, her voice tight, "we need to go to the bank. Now." I took another sip of coffee and met her eyes. "Why?" Her breath hitched slightly. "Because something is very wrong with our accounts. The money is gone." There it was, the panic, the realization that her grand plan was slipping through her fingers. And I could see it, the moment she began to suspect that this wasn't a mistake. This was me. She had no idea what was coming next. Lily sat across from me in the car, staring out the window as we pulled into the bank's parking lot. She hadn't spoken since we left the house, her mind clearly racing to make sense of what was happening. Her confidence had been chipped away overnight, but I could still see the remnants of her composure, the belief that this was all some sort of mistake. We stepped inside, and I watched as she approached the teller with forced calm. "I need to check my account balances," she said, sliding her ID across the counter. The teller typed for a moment, then frowned. "I'm sorry, but it appears this account has been closed." Lily's posture stiffened. "That's impossible. Check again." The teller glanced at me before speaking. "The closure request was processed a month ago. Do you have another account you'd like me to check?" I could see the color drain from Lily's face as she turned to me, realization dawning. Her voice was quieter this time. "Casper, what's going on?" I gave her a small, knowing smile. "Why don't we talk outside?" She followed me, her steps slower than before. The moment we stepped into the open air, she grabbed my arm. "Tell me what you did," she demanded, her voice wavering. "Where's the money?" I exhaled, looking her in the eye. "Gone. Or at least, gone from your reach. Everything you thought you were going to take from me? It was never yours to begin with." She stared at me, disbelief mixing with panic. "You knew." "I knew," I confirmed. "From the moment I saw that message from Margaret, I knew what you were planning. And I decided to let you think you'd won, just long enough for me to make sure you lost." Her breath came faster now, her mind trying to grasp onto something, anything. "But we're married. I have rights." I shook my head. "You have nothing. Everything we own together? It was never truly joint. I made sure of that before we even said I do. The house? My name. The company? Protected. The bank accounts? Already emptied into places you can't touch." Tears welled in her eyes, though I wasn't sure if they were from betrayal or pure frustration. "You can't just throw me away like this." I studied her for a moment. "I didn't throw you away, Lily's. You made your choice. And now you get to live with it." Lily's moved out that week. There was no dramatic fight, no last attempt at manipulation. She knew when she had lost. She packed her things and left, though not before one last conversation. "Where will you go?" I asked, standing in the doorway as she loaded the last of her bags into a taxi. She didn't meet my eyes. "I don't know." I nodded. "Margaret told me she offered you a place to stay." She laughed bitterly. "And you think I'd accept that?" "That's up to you," I said simply. "But at least she cares enough to try." She hesitated, then finally looked at me. Did you ever love me? I thought about that for a long moment before answering. I loved the person I thought you were. She didn't say anything else. She just got into the taxi and left. And with that, the chapter of my life with lilies was over. As the days passed, the house felt different, quieter, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. I focused on rebuilding, not just financially but emotionally, finding solace in routine and reflection. Margaret and I stayed in touch. What started as an alliance turned into a friendship and eventually something more. It wasn't immediate. Trust wasn't something I was ready to give so easily again. But Margaret was patient, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had someone who was truly in my corner. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me. "You okay?" I thought about it, really thought about it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. "I think I will be." Margaret smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled back.